Commander Vex 9 clicked his mandibles in what passed for amusement among the Thrakari as he watched the human female pace across the Academy's tactical simulation chamber. The creature called herself Professor Lisa Kane, and she had been assigned to teach defensive strategies to the galaxy's most elite military minds. The irony wasn't lost on him. Humans, those bizarre bipedal mammals from the third rock, orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, teaching the art of defense to species that had been waging interstellar wars since before their planet had even cooled. "Ridiculous," muttered Cadet Zorn 5, his purple exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. What could these soft-skinned primitives possibly teach us about warfare? Vex 9's compound eyes rotated slightly to observe his subordinate. The young Thrakari had a point. Humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel 37 years ago. Most of the species in this room had been conquering solar systems when Earth's dominant life form was still figuring out how to make fire without rubbing sticks together. "Now then," Professor Kane announced, her voice carrying across the chamber with surprising authority. "Today's lesson focuses on defensive positioning using minimal resources." She gestured toward a holographic display that materialized above the central platform. "Can anyone tell me what this is?" The display showed a simple white stick, no longer than a human hand, cylindrical and unremarkable. Cadet Grax, a towering Vorthak whose species had perfected siege warfare before humans had invented the wheel, raised one of his 4 arms. It appears to be some form of primitive writing implement. "Correct." Kane clapped her hands together, producing a sharp sound that made several cadets flinch. "This is chalk, a simple tool used for writing on dark surfaces. Cost? Approximately 2 credits. Length? 10 centimeters. Weight? Negligible." She paused, her brown eyes scanning the assembled group of alien military students. "Who here believes this could stop a full-scale invasion?" Silence filled the chamber, broken only by the soft hum of life support systems. A few mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter among the insectoid species present. "No volunteers?" Kane's lips curved into what Vex 9 had learned was called a smile. Among humans, this expression could indicate anything from friendliness to predatory intent. He was beginning to suspect the latter. "Well then, let me tell you about the Great Chalk Incident of 2387. The holographic display shifted, showing a 3-dimensional map of a star system. At its center, a blue-green planet rotated slowly. "This is Kepler 442b, Kane continued, her tone becoming more serious. "A human colony world. Population roughly 12 million. Beautiful place, really. Rolling hills, vast oceans, the kind of world poets write about." The display zoomed in, showing sprawling cities connected by silver threads of transportation networks. Unfortunately for the colonists, it also happened to sit directly on the most strategically valuable hyperspace junction in the entire Orion Arm. Cadet Yith 17, whose species the Corvani were known for their mathematical precision in warfare, raised a tentacle. "Hyperspace junctions cannot be relocated. The humans would have had no choice but to fortify heavily." "You'd think so, wouldn't you?" Kane's smile grew wider. "But here's where things get interesting. The colony had exactly 1 defense platform, built 40 years earlier and scheduled for decommission. Its weapons systems were so outdated that most modern starships wouldn't even register them as a threat." Vex 9 leaned forward despite himself. He had studied human military history extensively, and this particular incident had been classified far above his clearance level. "The attacking force," Kane continued, manipulating the display to show red dots surrounding the planet, "consisted of 327 ships, from the hegemony of SEC. Their flagship alone carried enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. The invasion fleet's commander, Warlord Tech Prime, had conquered 18 systems in the previous decade. His tactical record was flawless. What happened? The question came from Cadet Ming, a young human who had somehow earned placement in the elite program despite his species' recent arrival on the galactic stage. Kane's expression became thoughtful. The colonists sent exactly one transmission to the invasion fleet. It lasted 14 seconds and contained no threats, no demands, no military posturing whatsoever. She paused dramatically. Would anyone like to guess what they said? They surrendered immediately, suggested Grax with obvious disdain. Oh, my large purple friend, how wrong you are! Kane's eyes sparkled with mischief. The transmission consisted of Colony Governor Sarah Martinez sitting in her office, holding up a piece of chalk and saying, "We'd like to demonstrate something before you land. Please observe our orbital defense platform." The holographic display shifted focus to show the ancient defense platform, a bulky, ungainly structure that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts by enthusiastic amateurs. The platform, Kane continued, fired exactly one projectile. Not a missile, not a plasma bolt, not some exotic matter weapon. It fired a single piece of chalk at approximately 15,000 meters per second. Vex 9 felt his mandibles stop clicking entirely. Around the chamber, aliens of various species had gone completely still. The chalk struck an asteroid approximately 2 kilometers wide, located precisely between the invasion fleet and the planet. Kane manipulated the display, showing the trajectory. Upon impact, the asteroid, well, it didn't explode. It didn't shatter dramatically. It simply ceased to exist. Impossible, breathed Zorn 5. Chalk is calcium carbonate. It's soft, brittle. It couldn't possibly. You're absolutely right, Kane agreed cheerfully. Chalk, by itself, possesses no special properties. It can't cut through battleship armor, can't generate force fields, can't manipulate gravity. It's just chalk. She paused. But speed, my dear students, speed changes everything. Yith 17's tentacles writhed in agitation. The kinetic energy would be enormous, but even so, to completely vaporize 2 cubic kilometers of solid rock. Ah, but they didn't vaporize it, Kane corrected. They converted it entirely to energy using a little thing called E equals mc squared. At 15,000 meters per second, that tiny piece of chalk had become something quite different from its humble origins. The chamber fell silent except for the soft whisper of air recyclers. Vex 9 found himself calculating the energy release in his head and immediately wished he hadn't. Warlord Tech Prime, Kane continued, was apparently quite good at mathematics, because the very next thing that happened was his entire invasion fleet jumping back to hyperspace without so much as a final transmission. But, Grax protested, his massive frame shifting uncertainly, surely they realized it was a bluff. The colonists couldn't possibly have more than a handful of such projectiles. The power requirements alone. Kane nodded approvingly. Excellent tactical thinking. You're absolutely correct on all counts. The colony's power grid couldn't have supported another shot like that for at least 6 months. They had maybe a dozen pieces of chalk suitable for ammunition. The defense platform itself was held together with prayer and spare parts. Then why didn't the hegemony return? Demanded Zorn 5. Because, Kane said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. They couldn't be sure. Think about it from Tech Prime's perspective. He had just witnessed a human colony turn a piece of classroom chalk into a planet-killing weapon using nothing but speed and physics. What else might these bizarre primates have in their arsenal? Vex 9 felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. He was beginning to understand why human military tactics had become required study at the Academy. The beautiful part, Kane continued, warming to her subject, was the psychological impact. Word spread through the galactic military networks within days. Humans, the newcomers, the species everyone had dismissed as technologically primitive, had somehow weaponized office supplies. She gestured, and the display showed news feeds and military reports from across known space. Within a year, 3 different species had developed their own kinetic bombardment systems. 2 interstellar wars ended in stalemate because both sides became too paranoid about orbital strikes to commit their fleets. The entire tactical doctrine of space combat shifted overnight. Cadet Ming raised his hand tentatively. Professor Kane, what happened to the colony? Kepler 442b? Kane's smile returned full force. It became the most secure system in human space, without firing another shot. Turns out, nobody wanted to test whether the colonists had more tricks up their sleeves. The planet's still there, still peaceful, still using the same ancient defense platform. And the chalk? Asked Vex 9, surprising himself by speaking aloud. Governor Martinez had it bronzed and mounted in her office, Kane replied. I understand it makes quite the conversation piece. She moved to the front of the chamber, her expression becoming serious once more. This brings us to today's lesson about defensive strategy. Defense isn't about having the biggest guns or the strongest shields. It's about making your opponent believe that attacking you will cost more than they're willing to pay. The holographic display shifted again, showing tactical scenarios and defensive positions. The humans of Kepler 442b understood something that many military theorists forget, Kane continued. Sometimes the most effective weapon isn't the one that does the most damage. It's the one that makes your enemy's imagination do the work for you. Yith 17's tentacles moved in the Corvani gesture of puzzlement. But surely such tactics only work once the enemy understands the deception. Do they? Kane interrupted. Tell me, Cadet Yith 17, if you were planning an attack on a human world today, right now, what would you be thinking about? The Corvani student was quiet for a long moment. I would be, wondering what other seemingly innocent objects they might have weaponized. Exactly. Kane clapped her hands again. And that hesitation, that moment of doubt, is worth more than all the battleships in the galaxy. Because in that moment of hesitation, your enemy has already begun to defeat themselves. Grax shifted his massive bulk, his forearms gesturing in agitation. This is madness. Warfare is about strength, about crushing your enemies with overwhelming force. These tricks, they're beneath the dignity of true warriors. Tell that to Warlord Tech Prime, Kane replied mildly. Last I heard, he was still trying to explain to his superiors how he lost an invasion fleet to a classroom supply. Zorn 5 made a sound that might have been laughter. The hegemony court-martialed him, didn't they? Actually, no, Kane said, surprising everyone. They promoted him. Turns out, recognizing when you're outmatched and withdrawing is considered a sign of tactical brilliance in hegemony culture. Who knew? She moved toward the center of the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. The point of today's lesson isn't that you should start stockpiling office supplies, Kane continued. The point is that effective defense requires understanding your enemy's psychology as much as their capabilities. The humans of Kepler 442b didn't win because they had superior firepower. They won because they understood that sometimes making your enemy afraid of what you might do is more effective than actually doing it. Vex 9 found himself grudgingly impressed. Human military doctrine had initially seemed chaotic and unpredictable to his orderly Thrakari mind. But there was a strange logic to it, a method to the apparent madness. "Professor," he said, "are there other examples of such creative defensive strategies?" Kane's eyes lit up with obvious enthusiasm. "Oh, Commander Vex 9, I was hoping someone would ask that question." She gestured, and the holographic display began cycling through star charts and tactical readouts. "Let me tell you about the rubber band gambit of 2391, or perhaps the Great Paper Airplane Incident at the Battle of Wolf 359. Around the chamber, alien cadets leaned forward despite themselves. Even Grax seemed intrigued, his massive frame shifting as he focused on the display. "But first," Kane said, raising a finger, "let me ask you this. If a piece of chalk can stop an invasion fleet, what do you think a determined group of humans might accomplish with a box of paper clips?" The silence that followed was profound and slightly terrifying. Vex 9 realized that human defensive doctrine wasn't about superior technology or overwhelming force. It was about turning the enemy's own assumptions against them, about making the familiar become threatening, about weaponizing uncertainty itself. As Professor Kane began her next tale, about how a human colony had convinced an entire pirate fleet to surrender using nothing but office supplies and theatrical smoke, Vex 9 couldn't help but wonder what other innocent objects might be lurking in human supply closets, waiting to become instruments of psychological warfare. The thought was both fascinating and deeply, deeply disturbing. Outside the Academy's windows, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, unaware that somewhere in the galaxy, human colonists were probably turning staplers into strategic weapons and post-it notes into tactical advantages. The universe, Vex 9 reflected, had become a much more interesting and terrifying place since humanity had joined the galactic community. And they had only been out here for 37 years. Professor Kane moved toward a secondary control panel, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces with practiced ease. "The rubber band gambit," she announced, took place at the Proxima Centauri mining station. Population 834 souls, mostly asteroid miners and their families. The display shifted to show a small industrial complex floating in the void between two massive asteroids. It looked about as militarily significant as a grocery store. "The attacking force this time," Kane continued, "belonged to the Skarn Collective. Nasty bunch, really. They specialized in raiding remote installations, stripping them of resources, and selling the inhabitants into slavery. Cadet Brix, a crystalline being whose species communicated through harmonic resonances, chimed a question that the universal translator rendered as, "What defensive capabilities did this mining station possess?" "Absolutely none," Kane replied cheerfully. "No weapons, no shields, no military personnel whatsoever. Their most dangerous piece of equipment was a plasma cutter used for asteroid processing." Zorn 5's mandibles clicked in confusion. Then how could they possibly mount any resistance? "Ah, but you're thinking like a traditional military strategist," Kane said, wagging her finger. The station's chief engineer, a delightfully twisted individual named Marcus Webb, had spent 20 years working in zero-gravity construction. He understood something about physics that most people never consider. She manipulated the display, showing the interior layout of the mining station. When the Skarn fleet arrived, demanding surrender and preparing to dock, Engineer Webb made an announcement over the general communications channel. He said, and I quote, "Before you board us, we'd like to demonstrate our defensive capabilities. Please observe." Vex 9 felt his compound eyes focus intently on the display. He was beginning to recognize the pattern in human defensive tactics. Webb then proceeded to attach a simple rubber band to a small metal bolt, Kane continued. The kind of rubber band you might use to hold papers together. He stretched it back approximately 30 centimeters and released it. The display showed the trajectory of the tiny projectile as it flew through the station's main corridor. In normal gravity, Kane explained, this would have been utterly harmless. The bolt might have traveled a few meters before dropping to the floor, but in zero gravity, with no air resistance to speak of, it would maintain its velocity indefinitely, breathed Yith 17, his tentacles writhing in realization. Precisely. Kane's smile was particularly unsettling this time. That tiny bolt, propelled by nothing more than a stretched rubber band, flew the entire length of the station's main corridor, through 3 connecting tunnels, ricocheted off 2 bulkheads, and embedded itself half a centimeter deep into a solid steel support beam. The chamber fell silent, except for the soft whir of air recyclers. The Skarn fleet commander, Kane continued, was apparently quite good at extrapolation. Because his very next transmission was a request for safe passage through the system, along with an apology for the misunderstanding. Grax's 4 arms gestured in obvious frustration. This is absurd! A rubber band cannot possibly be considered a serious weapon. Tell that to the bolt embedded in the support beam, Kane replied mildly. Or better yet, tell it to the Skarn commander, who realized that if humans could weaponize rubber bands, what might they do with actual mining equipment? She gestured, and the display showed the station's plasma cutters and industrial-grade magnetic accelerators. The beauty of Engineer Webb's demonstration, Kane continued, wasn't the damage it actually caused. It was the damage it implied might be possible. Suddenly, every piece of mining equipment on that station became a potential weapon in the eyes of the attackers. Cadet Ming raised his hand tentatively. What happened to the mining station after that? It became the most secure location in the Proxima system without spending a single credit on actual defenses, Kane replied. The Skarn Collective added it to their avoid at all costs list. 3 other pirate groups did the same within the month. She moved toward the front of the chamber again, her expression becoming more serious. This brings us to the most important part of today's lesson, she said. Both the chalk incident and the rubber band gambit worked because they exploited the same fundamental weakness in aggressive military thinking. Which is? Asked Vex 9, genuinely curious now. Assumption, Kane replied simply. Military strategists assume they understand their enemy's capabilities based on observable technology and known resources. But humans have a peculiar talent for making the impossible seem routine. The holographic display shifted to show comparative tactical analyses from various galactic military academies. After the chalk incident, Kane continued, every major military force in the galaxy began developing countermeasures against kinetic bombardment. Billions of credits were spent on defensive systems designed to stop high-velocity projectiles. Logical response, commented Brix, his crystalline form resonating with approval. Except, Kane said with that disturbing smile, humans never actually developed kinetic bombardment as a standard weapon. The Kepler 442b incident was a one-time demonstration using a piece of obsolete equipment and a lot of creative physics. Zorn 5's exoskeleton made a clicking sound that indicated deep confusion. Then all those defensive systems were designed to counter a threat that didn't actually exist, Kane confirmed. Meanwhile, human colonies continued to defend themselves using increasingly creative applications of everyday objects. She gestured, and the display began cycling through incident reports. The Great Paperclip Campaign of 2389, she announced, where colonists on Tau Ceti convinced a battlecruiser squadron to retreat by demonstrating how paperclips could be magnetically accelerated to dangerous velocities. The Stapler Siege of 2390, she continued, where miners on asteroid base Gamma 7 used modified office staplers to create the illusion of automated defensive turrets. And my personal favorite, Kane said, her eyes sparkling with obvious delight, the Post-it note paradox of 2391, where human diplomats ended a three-way territorial dispute by convincing all parties that Earth had developed invisible spacecraft using advanced adhesive technology. Vex 9 felt his worldview shifting in ways that were both fascinating and deeply uncomfortable. Professor Kane, are you suggesting that human defensive strategy is based entirely on deception? Not deception, Kane corrected. Misdirection. There's a subtle but important difference. Everything humans demonstrated in these incidents was technically possible. We never lied about our capabilities. We simply allowed our enemies to draw their own conclusions about what those capabilities might mean. Grax shifted his massive bulk again, his four arms crossing in a gesture of stubborn resistance. This is not warfare. This is theater. Exactly. Kane clapped her hands together with obvious enthusiasm. You've grasped the essential point. Human defensive strategy treats warfare as a form of performance art, with the enemy as our audience. She moved to the center of the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. Traditional military thinking focuses on the physical destruction of enemy forces, she continued. But humans realized something important early in our spacefaring career. It's much more efficient to convince your enemies to defeat themselves. Yth 17's tentacles writhed in what might have been admiration or horror. The psychological impact must be enormous. Every mundane object becomes a potential weapon in the enemy's perception. Precisely, Kane agreed. And that's the true genius of human defensive doctrine. We've weaponized uncertainty itself. The holographic display shifted to show current galactic military expenditures. In the past 5 years, Kane announced, the combined military forces of the galaxy have spent over 2 trillion credits developing countermeasures against threats that may or may not exist. Meanwhile, human colonies continue to defend themselves using materials that cost less than a decent meal. She paused, allowing the implications to sink in. But here's where things get really interesting, Kane continued. Last month, intelligence reports indicated that the hegemony of SEC has begun stockpiling office supplies. The chamber fell completely silent. Rubber bands, paper clips, chalk, staplers, Kane listed, her voice taking on an ominous quality. Industrial quantities, purchased through shell companies and transported to forward military bases throughout hegemony space. Vex 9 felt his mandibles stop clicking entirely. They're copying human tactics. Oh, it gets better, Kane said, her smile becoming genuinely frightening. 3 other major powers have begun similar procurement programs. The Corvani Supremacy placed an order for 50 million ballpoint pens last week. The Vorthak Empire just purchased the entire production output of a rubber ball manufacturing plant. She gestured, and the display showed shipping manifests and procurement orders from across the galaxy. Within 6 months, Kane predicted, half the military forces in known space will be armed with office supplies and convinced that the other half has secret weapons programs based on household items. Cadet Ming raised his hand with obvious trepidation. Professor Kane, what happens when everyone realizes it was all psychological warfare? Kane's expression became thoughtful. That's the beautiful part, Cadet Ming. By the time they figure it out, it won't matter anymore. I don't understand, admitted Brix, his crystalline form resonating with confusion. Think about it, Kane explained. Right now, at this very moment, military researchers across the galaxy are working frantically to weaponize staplers and rubber bands. Some of them are probably going to succeed. The implications hit Vex 9 like a physical blow. They're going to create the very threats they were trying to defend against. Exactly! Kane's enthusiasm was genuinely disturbing now. Within a decade, someone will actually develop an effective paperclip-based weapon system. Rubber band artillery will become a legitimate field of military research. Chalk will be classified as a strategic material. She moved toward the viewing port, gazing out at the star-filled void. Human defensive strategy, she said quietly, wasn't just about protecting our colonies. It was about fundamentally altering the nature of galactic warfare itself. Zorn 5 made a sound that might have been admiration or terror. You've turned the entire galaxy into a psychological battlefield. We've leveled the playing field, Kane corrected. For the first time in galactic history, a small colony with limited resources can defend itself against a major military power simply by being creative enough to make their enemies afraid. She turned back toward the assembled cadets, her expression serious once more. That's the real lesson here, she said. Defense isn't about matching your enemy's strength. It's about making them question whether they want to find out what you're really capable of. Vex 9 found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about military strategy. Human doctrine had seemed chaotic and unpredictable because it was designed to be exactly that. Unpredictability had become their greatest weapon. Professor, he said slowly, what's next? Where does this strategy lead? Kane's smile returned, but this time it was genuinely warm rather than predatory. That, Commander Vex 9, is entirely up to you and your fellow officers, because now you know the secret. The question is, what are you going to do with it? She moved toward the exit, then paused and looked back at the assembled cadets. Oh, and one final thing, she added casually. Has anyone here ever considered the military applications of birthday cake? The silence that followed was profound and deeply, deeply unsettling. After Professor Kane left the chamber, the alien cadets sat in stunned quiet for several minutes. Finally, Grax spoke, his massive frame shuddering slightly. I need to contact my homeworld, he said. We're going to need a lot more office supplies. Vex 9 nodded slowly. Outside the Academy's windows, the stars continued their ancient dance, unaware that across the galaxy, military quartermasters were probably adding birthday cake to their strategic procurement lists. The universe had indeed become a much more interesting place since humanity had arrived, and somehow, Vex 9 suspected, they were just getting started.